Good afternoon or good morning for those of you on the West Coast of the U.S. My name is Dr. Dustin Sachs, and I'm really excited to be here to launch a new series that we're going to be doing here at the CyberRisk Collaborative. Many of you have been familiar with the other webcasts that we do where we do our first Thursday CISO stories. One of the things that we're actually getting ready to do as well is we're moving to the end of the month our webcasts on the technology topics and the resource toolkits and task forces that we have been running over the past couple of months. Today, we're actually launching a completely different series that is really focused on leadership and some of those what we would consider non-technical skills and topics that you have asked us for and that you find to be the ones that you want to hear from the best and the brightest. And we have that absolutely here with us today. For those of you who this may be the first time that you've been exposed to the CyberRisk Collaborative, the CyberRisk Collaborative is our member community of CISOs and senior security leaders from top organizations around the country that was developed to be a community of information sharing, conversations, building of resources and tools and things to help make your job easier every day and help your teams do their jobs better. Our mission, as I always like to go over with at the beginning of these webinars, is really to accelerate career development, to offer decision support, help you make better decisions, better address the strategies and topics that are of most importance to you. We do this in a vendor and analyst free environment. We want open collaboration. It's about information sharing. It's about expanding your network and building your personal brand and having those tools and things available to you 24/7, 365. We do that through a number of things, as we're talking about today: leadership development, the technical workforce development topics, intelligence and insights, our CISO developed tools and resource toolkits, pure collaboration, our task forces, our meetups, both live, in person and digital, and also the opportunity for you to participate in our speakers bureau or the SC media side of the CRA organization to really build your own personal brand or amplify your own personal brand. But all that aside, I'm really excited to introduce our guests today for this very first leadership webinar series of 2025. Really excited to be joined by Bob West, Managing Partner at West Strategy Group, and Shannon Rowbury, who is now an Olympic bronze medalist and managing partner at West Strategy Group. Bob, you want to introduce yourself a little bit more, and then Shannon, you as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dustin. So I've worked in security for a little over 30 years. I've had a combination of roles, enterprise, consulting, and product roles. I've had 3 CISO roles, 2 with large banks, consulted on my own with Deloitte, E&Y. And most recently in the product world, I was on the Palo Alto Networks Prisma Cloud leadership team. And Shannon and I started working together a little over a year ago. Great to be here.
Great. And yes. Shannon, please.
Yeah, so my background is not in cybersecurity, but I'm loving being a part of this community thanks to Bob and his sort of sponsorship and mentorship bringing me into the space. We met back in 2017 through track and field. My background is in professional athletics. I competed professionally from 2007 through about 2021 in track and field, 1,500 meters, 3 Olympic teams, Olympic bronze medalist, 2 American records, 2 world medals, world record. Probably the most thing I'm proud of, though, is the consistency. I had a decade ranked top 10 in the world. And the reason why that is the one I'm most proud of is because that takes the ability to build a team around me to be resilient. I'm proud of the ability to show up through the highs and lows and still deliver. And I'm thrilled that we're here today speaking with you, Dustin, because those that idea of resiliency is a human trait, and it starts with the way that we show up. The work that Bob and I do at West Strategy Group, I lead our leadership vertical, and we really work with companies, with teams, with individuals to figure out, how can we help with performance optimization? How can we help you be a better leader and achieve big goals, whether it be at home or in the workplace? Because like I said, at the end of the day, it's these human traits, and success is success regardless of what you are pursuing.
Absolutely. So couple quick housekeeping for those of you who are joining us. If you've got questions, please feel free to use the question and answer button. It's the second one from the left in the middle of your screen, as well as the chat function, which is the one all the way to the left. If you've got questions or thoughts or insights that you want to share, please feel free to do that. So today, what we really wanted to talk about was this idea of building a resilient workforce. There have been, and without getting into the particulars of any one event, there have been several events over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 months, from natural disasters to sudden, shocking pieces of news to any number of things that have really brought to the forefront the idea of having a resilient workforce, having a plan so that you don't have a single point of failure in your organization, or that you're not reliant on a single person to carry the team, because if that person then is no longer available for whatever reason, that then you end up having to start back at square one. And that's when invariably something is going to go wrong that is going to be significant and require a lot of effort. So the first kind of area that I really want to focus on and really want to ask some questions from you both about is really this idea of doing that introspective, being, looking at your team, doing that analysis to identify where are those single points of failure and how can you mitigate them. So Bob, what are some of from your experience, what are some of the kind of the most common or the most pronounced single points of failure in business and in cybersecurity?
Yeah. I think fundamentally, team structure and depth is one of the areas. So when I've stepped into my CISO roles, I always do a talent assessment. Do the people are people in the right roles? Do they have the right skills? To your point, there's turnover on a regular basis, in large part because there's a shortage of cybersecurity people in our industry. And so the notion of cross-training people. So as an example, do the people on the identity team have the skills to work with the people in incident response or security operations, right? I've always looked at cross-training people and having a very formal program around cross-training, and even going up to the CISO level. Everyone is not only replaceable, but CISOs move from one organization to another. So having a succession plan as a CISO becomes really important in case the CISO leaves or makes a change, that the organization is properly prepared. You have to look at it from an organization perspective, right? There's a lot of people that will look at things from a me, what's best for me. But at the end of the day, the right decisions are made if you look at it from what's best for the organization.
No, absolutely. So Shannon, as I think about your background, and yes, you say, you didn't come from maybe the traditional route into cybersecurity that many people may have come in through. But if there's ever a place where unexpected things that take somebody out of a team might happen, it's in sports, and especially, sports where you're being very, very, very active. Somebody's running and all of a sudden they trip or they twist their ankle or something, and now they're no longer. So how have you found, and how have you addressed identifying these single points of failure or places where things could go wrong that we don't have a backup plan for, or that we need to have a backup plan for?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was competing, in track and field, it's an individual sport. And so while Team USA would identify alternates for an Olympic competition, ultimately, if I wasn't able to toe the line, then I wouldn't get to represent my country. Representing my country was the number one goal, but I also needed to have a resiliency plan for myself to, both near term and long term maintain that consistency so that I could show up day after day. And so, when I think about that resiliency of a team, it's with that individual. How are you approaching your day-to-day routine in a way that can keep you healthy mentally and physically? Do you have good tools to sort of create balance in an unbalanced space? There are going to be intense times, but how have you figured out how to kind of understand the seasonality of your role where possible, or take that recovery where you can? From a team perspective, I needed to understand a couple things. One, I had to know who my resources were. So if I was in a challenge situation, I had to have a lot of clarity on who I could turn to and really trust those people to own the tasks that they were doing. I think about it. I had a head coach, an assistant coach, a PT, a weight coach, sports psychologist, so many different things. And I needed to be the kind of center of that wheel and know who I could turn to and not try to do their jobs for them, but trust that they had the skill set for that. I think also within that team structure, because I was part of a team, it was really important that and we had this happen, our head coach was unable to be part of training right leading up into the national championships. Our assistant coach had to step up, but that required that our assistant coach had the confidence, the understanding of what was going on, the ability to step into that role when needed. And it reminds me of, Coach K, legendary basketball coach. He talked about how he would train assistant coaches with the expectation that they would leave. And so if you go in understanding that the people within your environment, they should feel like you are giving them the best opportunity to thrive, whether that's with you or without you, you will build loyalty, you will build strength, you will build resiliency. And ultimately you'll have an agile team that can step up when an unexpected moment happens.
I think you raised a really great point. It's one that actually really pinged off a memory in my mind, because at the last organization I was at, the CISO who I worked for, who I was a direct report to, would often say to us, he's like, I don't want you to be here in 5 years. I want you to be at the next level in your career somewhere. Like my goal is not to make it so that you stay here forever if that's not what you want to do. My goal is to make it so that I can say I've got these number of quote unquote disciples out there, doing things. And I think your example of Coach K, and, you talk about, any of the legendary coaches, Nick Saban, any of those that all look, that everybody is evaluated as, I was an assistant under Nick Saban, and therefore I am like worthy of some level of recognition, is a really important and really interesting thing, because it requires a level of leadership and a level of focus on that person and not on yourself and what's going to make you stand out the most. So,
and yet
Bob,
those coaches stood out significantly too. Like, it's kind of this wonderful, you give and you get even more than you've given in the first place. Like, if you want to be a legend. And in doing so, you will cement that legacy through the success that you foster beyond that just of yourself, but with the team and the people that you interact with.
Yeah. And building
absolutely.
on what Shannon was saying earlier, you have to assume that bad things are going to happen, right? We have security breaches. There's lots of things that happen from an organization perspective. And so being prepared to address them becomes particularly important, and making sure that everyone involved, when there's an issue, knows what their role is.
Absolutely. So, Bob, before we move into kind of the next topic, one of the things that really kind of stands out to me, and as I think about even my journey within cybersecurity, and I'm sure that this is something that will resonate with you as well, is when we talk about the concept of vulnerabilities. And when we talk about it in cybersecurity, I can turn on a vulnerability scanner. I can find all the technical vulnerabilities in the world, assuming that my vulnerability scanner is working correctly. But there's not a tool or a technology or a software that I can turn on and find the vulnerabilities in my own team. So how do you actually do that vulnerability assessment and identify those vulnerabilities proactively? Because of the, as we're going to talk about next month with incident response and incident response tabletops, you never want to be figuring it out when the actual live fire incident is occurring.
Yeah, it's interesting. So back before electricity, around 98, 99, when I was at Bank One, we did the Myers-Briggs exercise as a team. Pick your favorite personality assessment. And what I found really interesting in that was, there was a group of people that were introverted, right? And there were a couple people on the team that were introverted to the extreme. So I remember I was double or triple booked one day, and I had one of the guys on my team pinch hit for me in one of the meetings, and Paul is his name. And so Paul and I got together afterwards, and he gave me a debrief. And he goes, "Man, I'm just really, really tired. Extreme introvert. Doesn't like to be in meetings. Doesn't like to be around people. He just wants to focus and do his analysis." And so part of it is personality assessment. Then the second part is figuring out, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses as a person, not just from a technical background perspective, but from a leadership perspective. Not everyone is cut out to be a leader, right? Not every attorney makes a good general counsel, or not every CPA makes a good CFO.
And not everybody wants to be, and not everybody wants that, and that's okay.
So that's exactly where I was going, because you can be very successful as an individual contributor. You can be a great security architect. There's a number of things that you can do very, very well. It's understanding, what are the capabilities of the people, where should they be positioned, and then giving them the support to get there.
Yeah, I mean, and the one kind of example, the kind of most notable example that comes to mind in my mind is Steve Wozniak was never going to be the CEO of Apple. That was always a Steve Jobs thing. But Steve Wozniak was amazing at the job that, absolutely amazing at the job that he did. He was never going to be the CEO of Apple, nor did he probably ever want to be the CEO of Apple. But at the same time, Steve Jobs was never going to do what Steve Wozniak was capable of doing. Like, that just wasn't, and that's okay. I think part of the, and certainly part of the being part of a team is not everybody can play. Not everyone can be the pitcher on the pitcher's mound. You got to have a first baseman and a second baseman and a shortstop that all have different jobs. And that's okay, because in order for the team to be successful, you have to fill all of those positions that that you otherwise maybe would never be able to fill if you just said, oh, everybody's got to be in the same position. Not everyone can be the quarterback. Which I think is a lesson that Tom Brady had to learn this weekend. Is sometimes you have to sit back and just accept that you're the analyst now and not the quarterback. So
yeah.
So as we talk about, so you've identified the vulnerabilities, you've identified the areas, you've kind of gotten to understand the different dynamic of your team. Obviously, one of the most important things and one of the hardest things when we talk about being resilient is being adaptable to change and being open to change. None of us like change, whether we say we do or not. We don't like change. As humans, we just don't. Part of building that adaptability is, to some extent, having some level of knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer, making sure that you've got two people who know how to do every job. There are certainly, and I think, to executive level stuff, Bob, there's certainly a reason why you want to have two different people signing checks, or dual dual approval of identity or whatever, that come from a more of a like technical security or an ethics or whatever standpoint. But part of it is also building that adaptability even when it's not required, let's say, and it's not mandatory. So how have you found, and Shannon, for you as well, what have you found to be the most effective ways for organizations to encourage cross-training and skill diversification and avoid what we talked about, I think, in our prep call, which is this idea that, oh no, if somebody else learns how to do my job, now I'm going to get replaced.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Shannon.
I wanted to take it back a little bit, and I think to vulnerabilities, because I think it ties to adaptability in that it's surprising how often a team can be lacking when it comes to that understanding of awareness of each other, those interpersonal relationships, and especially in a virtual world where that small talk that you would have passing each other in the office, that gives you an opportunity to read body language and to read sort of the emotions of that other person. Those are missing when we have these virtual calls, which doesn't mean we can't find alternative ways to do it. But I think first, by understanding vulnerabilities, a lot of it does start back at that human element and creating opportunities for you as a leader, for your employees within teams to establish a baseline of each other's personalities. I'm higher energy. Some people are lower energy, but do you even know what kind of normal looks like for that coworker of yours? And then on top of that, are there opportunities to have conversations where you can read where that person is standing? So that's just from the human level. And then you layer on top of it, are there opportunities to assess vulnerabilities through the conversations you have in the team meetings that you lead? So when you're meeting as a group, are you creating opportunities for people to not just answer the obvious question, the direct questions that's stated, but maybe some more open-ended questions that could lead to discoveries about challenges, vulnerabilities, areas that need improvement. So as simple as, having a person within a leader of a vertical answer, what are you most excited about, and what's most concerning to you, and how can we work through that as a team? But these opportunities, just even within a given week or a given month, that when you meet as a whole, it's not just practicalities, checking off a list, but really having some discovery worked in there. And then I think that in and of itself creates adaptability, because you're constantly learning and iterating about what you should be aware of. And then beyond that, really trying to, as we were talking about at the very beginning, how have you built a team where there's individuals who can sort of take ownership of the vertical that they're leading or the task that they have at hand, and yet they have that communication of who they can turn to, so that they feel empowered in a challenge situation to take care of what needs to be taken care of, and it's not just all on you as a leader to try to do everything all at once.
No, I think what you said is spot on, and it's interesting because, and I've been very vocal over the last, let's say, week and a half about, the fact that one of my kind of, as I look back and reflect on it, one of the kind of great opportunities I had was in my last role was to be a deputy to the CISO and to a CISO who really fostered this idea that, we would have, everybody always complains about, I've got too many meetings on my schedule. There was one meeting, and I've told a couple people this story in the last week and a half. There was one meeting on the schedule that Sean Bowen insisted we had at my last company. Every week we had it, and it was the one meeting where you knew it was not going to get canceled or rescheduled. And what was that meeting? It was our water cooler meeting. It was a 1 hour meeting where we just sat around and talked about whatever movie people had seen over the past weekend, the show you watched last night, some ridiculous thing going on with your kid or whatever. And that was it. it was, we're not coming here to talk about anything going on at work. There is no work talk for the next hour. We are just going to hang out and have a good time and get to know each other. And the level of camaraderie it built amongst the team, and the fact that you started to understand, oh man, I have a lot of, common things that I can relate to other people with. I learned that one of my coworkers was almost as avid of a Jeopardy watcher as I am. So, it became a thing where I was like, we sat for, I remember on one call, we sat for 30 minutes breaking down, and this was back before they had settled on who their actual host was going to be, and that it was going to be Ken Jennings. We debated who should be allowed to be the successor to Alex Trebek. And these are I couldn't tell you about a meeting that happened in that same week that was technical related, but I remember a year and a half later that conversation, because it built this sense of camaraderie.
Yeah.
So and I don't
those
think
often
you can
get so undervalued.
Yeah, I don't think you can pay too much attention to the humanity and getting people to know each other and really understand, what they like, what they dislike, etc. And the other thing is that if you're going to work, and you may as well have fun, right? And just the fact that you remember that meeting is just such a testament to Sean's style and making sure that he was getting the team together, and it's another way of letting your hair down, if you will, and just having fun.
Yeah, and we'll talk in a little bit about how that creates a really interesting and a really good cultural environment for building resiliency. But before we get to that, one of the biggest challenges we've all, I think, been through at some point in our career is being on a team where a key piece of institutional knowledge went out the door for one reason or another, either because that person moved on to something bigger and better, or other reasons that somebody had to move on. How do you I've been really fascinated recently with this idea that you could actually take that knowledge transfer process, and you can create, instead of having the dilemma of institutional knowledge living with a single person, you can actually institutionalize institutional knowledge and make it something that is a repository that anybody can access. So it doesn't matter who leaves the organization, because that repository of knowledge exists. How do you build those kind of capabilities so that there isn't that loss of knowledge, that knowledge transfer gap? And I almost think, and I analogize to the idea that, and I told my students this, if my computer right now, if I took my personal computer and it got destroyed, I wouldn't lose any of the information I've got on there, because it's, institutionally stored in a cloud environment. How do you create that same kind of almost structure, but with the knowledge that people have?
So once a quarter, I would have different people in my team give presentations about what they were doing. Because to your point, there's a couple of benefits to that, right? People understand what Bob is doing in identity and access management. And when that person is presenting, there may be a light bulb that goes off. It's like, oh, now I understand the logic behind why Bob is doing X, Y, and Z, or I may be able to compensate for that, and have the ability to do my job better. There's also this crazy notion called documentation, which, there are a lot of people that it's not their strong suit. It's not my strong suit. But I remember talking to an auditor, and the auditor said, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And so there's multiple benefits for making sure that there's knowledge sharing, but also, to your point, having a process to formally document and share knowledge, so that someone leaves the organization, then operations continue as they should.
Absolutely. Then, so what this kind of also opens up, and I think we talked about this a little bit in the prep as well, was this idea that, and I'm not going to ask it kind of the way that I had originally thought I would, because I think the answer is more obvious, but how do you build, and this is a topic we're actually going to be very shortly starting a task force with our accelerator members on, which is the idea of building a succession planning program of some sort at your organization. And it's a tricky one. It's one of those like weird double-edged swords, because you're training the person who you ultimately to prepare them to be able to replace you. And if you do a good enough job, they're able then to replace you. And, I kind of, it's rare, I feel like, Shannon, to come across the Coach K's of the world, the Nick Sabans of the world that are saying, hey, I want you to please take my job. Like, please go get a similar job, whatever. I want you to be able to do that. How do you build that kind of mentality and that kind of setup so that you can be comfortable training somebody who could ultimately be a replacement for you?
Yeah, to your point, there's a lot more fear about and maybe insecurity that we observe than that kind of confidence of I'm going to train you to kind of flourish. That takes a high level of confidence in oneself. I think about it in the same way each one of us, well, at least my husband and I, we're late to the table, but we just did our living trust, and the process of sitting down and really thinking through these hard questions was uncomfortable. You don't want to imagine worst case scenario, and yet if it is a possibility that things can go haywire, and assuming that you care about the legacy that you're building, whether it be at home, in your personal life, in your business, taking those steps to plan ahead, and to really lay out what would be the best step forward, what your wishes would be. This, I'm speaking specifically in this, living trust that I just created, but the same logic goes to a business space. And if you're thinking through kind of what the next steps would be afterwards, understanding that we do not live forever, and that there will come a point at which you do as an individual need to move on. It's really thinking through the steps in the process and being able to hopefully mentor those other people around you to step up into those roles, with clarity around what's even entailed in it. And I think in the process, you can have more clarity in your own day-to-day actions on, what it really is that you are doing, are owning, are there ways that you can improve on it. So if you can think about this process less about I'm training my replacement and more about kind of like growth and the future of the business, there's even the possibility that you come out stronger in the end because you have brought together a stronger team around you. But it does take a lot of that shifting of mindset from scarcity to opportunity.
And I think you brought up a really interesting thing that transitions really well to the next kind of area that I want to focus on, which is, we're sitting here, it's, February 12th, which means that for many, many organizations, this is kind of the peak of the performance review time period. Either you've just finished doing your self-evaluation, or your manager's in the process of doing their evaluation of you. More likely you're probably coming towards the back half of that, where now the leadership team is getting involved in doing their reviews. How can we take, traditionally the performance management process is about looking back at the last year and going, here's all the things you did great, here's all the things you didn't do so great, here's what you need to do to not do those things that you didn't do great in the next year, or hey, here's what you need to do to fix that stuff. But how can you use the performance review process as a way to build that resiliency and build that adaptability?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the things that the best organizations I worked with, there were 360 reviews. So you'd get a review from your boss, from your peers, and the people that were reporting to you. And it really gives you a comprehensive picture. So for example, some people manage up really well. maybe not so well sideways or going down. And that really creates a whole image of what you're good at and what you're not good at. But it also, you're not dependent on just one person's opinion about whether you did your job well or not, right? Um, and the best 360 review process was everyone's vote counted equally, including the boss. So, but it also laid out very well where you needed to improve. The other thing is that you don't want to wait for a year to give feedback, right? Because you sit down, to your point, it's performance review time. And you sit down, it's, well, Bob, I love you, but you didn't do so well. It's like, what? I thought I was doing a great job. So sitting down on a regular basis, I've done it on a quarterly basis to say, yeah, you're doing well, you're not doing well, you're headed in the right direction, here's what you need to tweak. That I think is very, very helpful in terms of getting to the end game gracefully.
You know, and before Shannon, before we come to you, because I do want to hear your thoughts on this, I think, Bob, you brought up the concept of 360 review, and I actually just finished going through one for the role where I'm an adjunct. And what's really interesting as well from sometimes on these 360 reviews is you realize where you've been too hard on yourself at times as well. You go, I thought I sucked at communicating stuff. And then you get the feedback from people and they go, you're great at communicating. We love the way you communicate. And you're like, oh man, I must have been really too hard on myself. Like I need to cut myself some slack. You know,
Yeah.
We always say we're our own worst critics, but so that's something you wouldn't otherwise get in another performance evaluation method. That is really can be very advantageous. It can actually end up kind of motivating you more because like, oh, actually people see me differently than I see myself in a good way. So Shannon, what are your thoughts on how do we make this like performance review process more of a positive, forward-looking thing than a retrospective? Here's where you sucked. And by the way, we're just telling you this now for the first time. We didn't tell you while it was happening so that you could fix it. We're telling you after the fact.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that that's the important thing is rather than this finality of that is done, that chapter is closed. Okay. If you want to have that review of the past and close that chapter, understandable. But if that person is staying within your organization, it's really important to have clarity both for them and for yourself on, Bob mentioned the direction that they're heading. Well, what is the goal? What are you trying to do in the next year? I think that the beginning and ending of things is a really important opportunity to reflect on what you learned from the year before. I often think of it as good, better, next. What were the things that I did well? What was one thing I could have done better, and what do I want to carry forward? But then you use that information to set a goal for the year ahead. And where do you want to be a year from now? What conversations do you want to be having? Why do you want those things? Because that information, that clarity about where you want to go, and more importantly, why you want to go there, the motivations behind that choice are going to be really important as you go through the days and months ahead. And if your supervisor, if your teammates at work, your fellow employees can understand that goal, the why behind that goal, it's a lot easier for them to get on board and kind of hold you accountable, support you along the way. It's a lot easier for you to get up when you don't feel like getting up to go do those things because there's something that you're really trying to achieve. There's a carrot out in front of you. And so I think, we're doing everybody a disservice if we don't, use that review as an opportunity to look ahead and really have clarity on where we want to go.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of, at the end of a project, well-structured projects have a lessons learned at the end of the project, right? What could we've done better? What worked well? What didn't go well? Mm-hmm. And the same thing holds true in terms of the review process. But just really understanding how can you improve on a go-forward basis is really important.
So before we move to the Q&A portion. One of the thing, or the audience Q&A portion, one of the kind of last questions I want to address, and Bob, I want to come to you first on this one, is invariably there's going to be a situation as a leader or as a manager or whatever that you're going to face where you're going to go, I myself am not even comfortable with this change. I have problems with this change myself, but I've got to lead a team of people who are also going to be uncomfortable with it. And I can't expose my own, I've got to almost like push down my own feelings of, oh my God, this change is massive and I'm not comfortable with it. How do you do that? What are the ways that are most beneficial to, and the tips to help that you as the leader go, you know what, I may be uncomfortable with this, but I can't show that uncomfortable nature to my team?
So I've been very lucky. I've had good mentors and sponsors in most of my positions. So when there's a big change or a big decision that needs to be made, and I'm not sure I have the answer to it, or I need validation on the decision, I will typically go to them and say, so I'm uncomfortable about this change. What's your perspective and how do I deal with it? Because no one has all the answers, right? And, going back to what Shannon said earlier, having the team around you to help you get through these issues is critical. And to your point, Dustin, if your team perceives that you're uncomfortable, they're going to be uncomfortable as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think of any, maybe an oversimplified version of it, but like if your company decided tomorrow that instead of giving everybody 2 weeks of vacation, we're going to give everybody 1 week, you certainly are going to be like, yeah, no, I'm not cool with that. Like, I'm not comfortable individually with that, but this is the directive, and now I've got to sell it to the team. How do you sell something to the team when you yourself maybe don't agree with it, which is going to happen? There are going to be decisions that are made that you're like, I don't like this one. So
I would say too, sorry, Dustin, but usually a decision, hopefully, assuming you have leadership that is not arbitrary in the decisions they made, most decisions aren't made in a vacuum. And so to Bob's point, can you understand the why behind that decision? And even if you dislike it, can you kind of wrap your head around it enough in the bigger context of what you're trying to achieve or the business needs to then show up kind of with an acceptance of why this is a necessary next step? And if you can't do so, then that's a bigger problem that you might need to work through. But I often, when I was competing, now when I'm working with clients, I feel very strongly that, we need to sort of have wrapped our head around whatever that thing is before we go forth and talk about it. And so it's really important to have an understanding of the why behind that shift, if at all possible, so that then when you show up and you get all the questions, which are going to come, you have clarity on what you can share with your team. You can meet them at that human level, and hopefully continue to gain their trust and confidence, maintain the trust and confidence that you've gotten from them, by being a leader who is their shepherd through whatever may come.
Absolutely. So as we get ready for audience Q&A, and if anyone's got any additional questions they want to submit, please feel free to do so. We'll go through, I'm going to certainly, while we're transitioning, go through some of the poll questions that we typically ask on these webinars, and give everybody a chance to answer those as we kind of address the kind of the first question that I have that came in. And we talked about this a little bit, I think, beforehand, just because I kind of anticipated this question was going to come in. But, what role does the concept of like psychological safety and building a culture of psychological safety play in building an adaptable team?
Shannon, you want to go first?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when we were discussing in our prep meeting, Dustin, this idea of psychological safety, really this ability for someone to feel confident enough that they can speak up, even if they even if they're the ones that made the mistake, even if they have a concern, that they understand that their commitment to the business and to its development will be seen, will be validated, and that if they are bringing their best selves forward, that they won't be penalized. And so I think, if you are trying to build a strong team, it is essential to have trust. Within that trust environment, you need to feel like, you can share whatever concerns you might have, ideas you might have, within reason, obviously being appropriate and professional. But this trust comes from that knowing that you can say something and you won't be slapped on the wrist because you didn't stay in line.
Yeah, Dustin, when we were prepping, one of the things you talked about was there was a person at a company that clicked on a link, realized it immediately, and called the CISO. And because they called immediately, they weren't penalized, and that's a very healthy environment, because you don't want to be in an environment where there's retribution when you raise an issue, right? Because if there is retribution, then they're not going to raise issues.
Right. No, absolutely. You want to create an atmosphere where it's okay to make some mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly if they're repeated and they're happen on a regular basis, that's not. But if we're all going to make an unforced error at some point in our our careers, and it doesn't need to be a career-ending thing or something that's going to stop you from succeeding. So Shannon, I want to start this one with you, because there's obviously one of the biggest challenges is when there's change going on, or even just in periods of uncertainty, it can be often hard for the leader themselves to maintain a level of motivation and engagement. How do you, and I certainly have some perspective from having gone through my doctoral experience, where I was like, there were nights where I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm tapped out. I'm ready, but I'm going to continue to push forward because I need to get this done, or here's why I'm doing it. But what do you do when you, as a leader, when you're faced with those moments where you're like, I'm done. I'm going to just phone it in.
Yeah, I think for me, it's usually two parts. First, it's sort of taking what can feel overwhelming cloud of responsibility and distilling it down into kind of a priority list. And within that list, really understanding, what are the top, 3 things that I need to focus my efforts on. And if I can get those done, maybe I go further down the list. But for right now, kind of what are the most important areas where I should be putting my time and energy? And the reason I say 3, there's a 1,000 things that you should do, but likely there's some kind of key aspects that really should be your primary focus. And that kind of clarity on where you should direct the majority of your time, I think helps us helps us achieve what my second point is, which is this idea of controlling the controllables. And in a challenge situation where there is a lot going on, bringing it back down to the here and now and what is within your purview. What can you impact in this moment? Are there ways that you can kind of compartmentalize, especially, it's not successful for the long term to do this compartmentalization, but when you're under duress, can you really bring it back down to the here and now and focus on the things that you can do to move yourself forward? First, maybe baby step by baby step, but then you could hopefully get some momentum that will lead to, lead you in the direction you want to go.
Absolutely. And Bob, any thoughts, anything to kind of add to that from your perspective?
Shannon's spot on. I think the other thing I would say is that, there's always hard decisions to be made, right? And you have to be as clear as possible. One environment that I was in where it was not done so well at the highest level, we had a merger of equals. And for those of you who don't understand the process, there's never a merger. There's always a buying party. And I understand the intent behind communicating that. but that also created a lack of clarity in terms of, okay, so who is going to be remaining, who is in charge. And so there was a lot of butting heads in that process. And there were also significantly different cultures in the organizations. I remember Bob Greifeld wrote this book called Market Mover. He was CEO at NASDAQ for 13 years, from 2003 to 2016. And there were two different parts of NASDAQ at the time. One was a for-profit business, and the other was a quasi-governmental entity. And the first thing that Bob did when he walked in the door was he fired all the people that needed to be fired that were reporting to him. And the second thing he did was he communicated, going forward, we're going to be a for-profit business. And if that's your comfort zone, then stick around. If it's not, we'll help you find another role elsewhere, but we're not going to operate that way. Those are hard decisions, but you need to make them. Otherwise, you can flounder. It costs money. It can cost you a workforce.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, final question before we get to our wrap-ups a bit. As we're getting here to the end, one of the things I definitely want to make sure we leave attendees and people who are listening to this after the fact with is some practical first steps. We've talked about a lot of different things that sound like they should be fairly obvious, fairly easy to do, but are a lot harder in practicality to actually do. As you look at the next 2, 3, 4 days, next week, 2 weeks, whatever, what is the kind of those advice, that steps, those practical tips you would give to people to say, take this and don't wait to start implementing it, do it now? Shannon.
When we work with clients for our leadership workshops, we often start with the question, or a series of questions, which is, kind of looking at this moment in time right now. How did you start on the path to get here? Like, where do you think where do you see this journey as beginning? The next question, why are you still on this path, and why do you kind of keep showing up on this path? And then the third being, kind of what do you hope to gain? If we're doing a workshop series, what do you hope to gain from that time together? But the first two, I think, to your question, I think the first two are really valuable for anybody and can be done. You could be thinking of them on your drive to work, on your run, anywhere. It's important, though, to take a little bit of time to reflect on the path that's gotten you to this moment and kind of the choices that you've made along the way, and having that line in the sand to think about, okay, if that is what got me here, is this the same path I want to follow, or are there opportunities and forks in the road that I might need to be taking instead? All of that then ultimately feeds into what is my goal moving forward. But if you don't really understand enough about your why and the journey that got you there and sort of the choices that you made along the way to be in this spot, it becomes much harder to really think about what is possible and where you want to be heading. And so, I would challenge everybody who's listening to this just to spend a little time reflecting on, why they have pursued, especially if they're within cybersecurity, which is such a impactful, but also, emotionally challenging industry to be in. But heroes are within it. So what were the choices that led you to this point, and kind of how do you want that identity of who you are and what got you here to inform the choices that you make moving forward?
And before we come to you, Bob, I'm not going to let Shannon slip past the fact that she was telling me I need to go start running. I get it, Shannon. Thanks. Like I understand that that's the most important step I need to take is like, go get out, like go run. I get it.
It is helpful. You and my wife, get some fresh air.
My wife keep saying the same things, and yeah. But Bob, from your perspective, what are some of the most practical tips?
Yeah, well, and also if you need additional encouragement, I'm happy to provide it as well, Dustin. But I'm pretty sure having somebody who competed in the Olympics as a track and field person
is probably the motivation, I probably need at this point.
I'm just saying I'm here for emotional support, but from an organization perspective, this is a good time to really determine, what are our goals between now and the end of the year. So we put together 3-year strategic plans. I've always done that in my career. Shannon and I did it when we started West Strategy Group, and we put together 3-year rolling strategic plans. And by that I mean year one has gone by. What have we done? What worked well? What didn't work well? But oh, by the way, we're doing some things now that we didn't anticipate. And so if we just maintained our course on our initial strategic plan, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing right now. So is the plan still relevant? Do I have the right people in the right places? What are the gaps? What's the education and training that people need, so that between now and the end of the year, they have the background to be able to execute on the plan? That would be my advice.
And I think that's great advice. And I would kind of even just add to that is, you hear the words 3-year plan, 1-year plan, whatever. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be every quarter, every couple months going back and going, where am I at? Is my plan still valid? Am I actually going to get to that point? Am I ahead? Am I behind? I'll leave this. I saw a funny meme the other day that was talking about how insidious OKRs can be, because if you set a really good OKR and you hit it, then they say, well, you were just being conservative. But if you miss your OKR, they're like, well, you obviously didn't work hard enough. So throughout the year, you need to be looking and going, have I found that, that Goldilocks scenario, if it fits just right for the year, to make sure you can make those adjustments, because the last thing you want to do is get to the end of the year and realize I could have made an adjustment that would have gotten me here where I needed to be. So, well, thank you both so much for being here today. Where can people find out more about what you guys are doing at West Strategy Group?
We are on LinkedIn. You can find both Bob and myself on LinkedIn, and also we have a West Strategy Group page. We have a website, and those would probably be the easiest ways. What do you think, Bob?
I agree. Yeah, I think I live and die by LinkedIn, so that's where I give my attention. But yeah, we have our website, gives you some high level information, and happy to chat if there's a need.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for being here. Thank you for participating in this first leadership webinar that we're doing this year. I think this was a great conversation. Thank you all for those of you who attended. Please stay close. We've got a lot of events still coming up in February. Yes, it's a short month, but that doesn't mean that we're not doing the same number of events or the same level of events that we do in any other month. And we've got some exciting things coming up in March as well. For those of you who have joined us today, thank you so much for being here. Look forward to seeing you all again very soon. For those of you who are listening to this after the fact, you should have been here live. It was a lot of fun. Thank you all again, and have a great rest of your week, great upcoming weekend. For those of you who get lucky enough to have a long 3-day weekend, please enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you again real soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Dustin.